Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about tame hacking, which is a kind of a strange term if you're not new to falconry. Also, if you're new to this channel, I'm filming this in the Halloween season, hence the cobwebs, although the animal hides and the headdress here with the saber-toothed skull, that's part of my normal regime of what I have out. But talking about hacking. Well, falconry has been around for thousands of years. Of course, it started as a way to get food. You would train a bird, and you would use it to get food. Now, usually, people were growing crops in the summer. And then in the fall, okay, you do your harvest, and now you have some free time, and you need some extra protein to be able to handle the winter. And so people would trap migrating raptors. Might have a sparrowhawk that came migrating over your mountaintops in the Alps, and you're going to trap that and use it to hunt little quail and things like that. Or maybe you're catching a migrating goshawk in the forest. Or maybe you're trapping a migrating peregrine falcon as it passes through. Whatever the case, there was a lot of migration that was trapped. But you don't always have a guarantee of that. You don't always guarantee you're going to be able to catch a bird or you're going to have a good bird. And so the idea of hacking came about. If you take a bird from the wild as a baby, that's called an eyas. And an eyas bird, whether it's from the wild or whether today we have captive breeding, so you might have captive bred eyas. Now these birds are totally reliant on you. And usually if you get an eyas, you're just raising it. You're not raising a whole nest of babies. So in the nest, there's certain skills that are learned, like, hey, some other birds are going to take my food. I have to kind of, learn to mantle and learn to kind of be protective and defensive of my food. Certain things you don't learn in captivity, because if you have a little eyas that you're raising yourself, it's your whole world, and you're just stuffing it constantly. It's well fed, it's loyal to you, but it also imprints on you. And that imprinting can cause some aggression problems, but also they're losing that hard edge that a wild bird has. If you catch a passage bird, it's not trusting of you at first, but boy, it knows how to hunt, it knows the value of food, it knows how to dive, it knows how to chase, it knows how to do everything. The opposite is true with an eyas raised bird. An eyas raised bird is totally trusting of you and totally calm and easygoing around you, but does not have that wild edge to know how to hunt and have the musculature of a wild bird that had to do all that. So the idea of hacking came about. Now, there's modern hacking and there's tame hacking, and I want to mostly talk about tame hacking, but first, the idea of hacking. In Elizabethan England is when we have our first reference to the term hacking or a hack. So a hack was a term for an old type of wagon, and certain falconers for the royalty would get eyas falcons from the wild and start to raise them, and then they'd take them on this hack wagon and put them up on a hilltop, and they'd bring them food, and the birds would learn to fly on their own and come back for the food. And but around the time that they were fully fledged, they'd be captured back, and they had then learned to fly, learned maybe to evade predators and those kind of things. But they had strength, they had some flight skill, but they were still a guaranteed bird. They were there, they were guaranteed to have them. And so that's kind of where hacking started. Now, it's most famous in the modern era, although there are falconers that still use hacking techniques. It's most famous in the modern era with peregrine falcons. When peregrine falcons in the United States almost went extinct, then captive breeding started with Project Peregrine, and peregrines were captive bred, and then you had to get them back to go into the wild. So it was sort of a reverse, captive birds being hacked to the wild instead of the other way around, and it worked very well. These hacking towers would be put kind of with, sort of a barrier where the birds could see out, and it was a big open country, and food would be brought to them, but then after several days, those would be open, and the birds were allowed to fly free and come back. They had a guaranteed meal as though a nest, but they learned to fly, they learned to build their muscles, they learned to build their strength, and then eventually, once that migration instinct kicked in, they would go out on their own. And that's way better than just captive breeding a bird and having it in a flight pan and then setting it free. It's way better to have this kind of gradient, this adjustment period. So hacking has gone both ways, from eyases taken from the wild in the olden days to, then be hacked to be more wild, to, ones that are released back into the wild through Project Peregrine. So you have both of these. Now, falconers, there are some breeders today that still do hacking towers, and a hacked bird is kind of viewed to be the best of both worlds. It's a bird that is more tame and has some more guaranteed, abilities around people, but it's built its muscle, it's built its strength, and it's learned to evade some predators, and it's ready to go. It's kind of almost as good as a passage bird, but hopefully more mellow and gentle around people. Well, tame hacking is kind of halfway in between. It's not a full hacked bird, and there's different forms of it. And depending on who you talk to, you're going to have different examples of what a tame hack is. So I want to give you kind of 3 examples. 2 are mine and 1 is one of my friends. So one of my friends, every year or two, he would get a Cooper's hawk from the wild to get a baby. And Cooper's hawks are notorious for becoming very vocal and very aggressive if they're imprinted incorrectly. And he thought, well, I'm going to do a tame hack. He lived right on the edge of the mountains, right in the foothills. So we had kind of neighborhoods with big yards and bird feeders and stuff down below, and he had kind of going into the mountains up above. And so he just did a little hack tower in his backyard, and he would just put a transmitter on his bird, radio transmitter, and he would just let the bird go every morning. And then he would call it back, and the bird would fly around and hang it. It always knew to come back because it viewed my friend's yard as basically being its nest. But that got the bird from, instead of just sitting around and being vocal all the time, it got the experience and probably caught a few birds while it was out and about, but it always came back. And then right when the bird was fully hard penned, he, brought it in and went back into regular falconry mode and hunting the bird. The birds, he did this, again, every few years, and the birds were great. And so that was his version of a tame hack. Now, one of the concerns with the tame hack is, well, what if the bird ditches out on you and you're not there? What if there's an emergency and, the bird gets chased down by another bird and you're not there to jump in and help him? There's concerns like that. Well, that's the same concern with flying a bird normally. Even if you are there, there's always risks. Falconry is an incredibly risky adventure to jump into. There's always the opportunity that your bird could be shot by somebody. It could get attacked by a wild bird. It could have all these bad things happen to it. So there's pluses and minuses. By doing some sort of a tame hack, you're giving your bird the best chance to become fit and be as close to a wild bird as possible, which is kind of our goal in falconry. We want them to be a totally wild bird and just come back when they're done. So there's pluses and minuses, and there's arguments on both sides. And again, feel free in the comments to let me know your thoughts on this. Now, 2 examples I've had. One, I had a goshawk. I believe it's been years now, but I believe this is my first imprint goshawk. And I imprinted it correctly, and it was very gentle, and it was very, very good to be around, very easy to handle, but it did become very vocal. And it was just maddening, that meh, 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 they do with that food begging. So I'm like, well, this bird needs to learn to grow up. How do I do this if it's just always used to my home and my surroundings? And so there was an area in the mouth of a canyon that I knew very well. It was privately owned, and I talked to the property owners, and I said, hey, can I just come up here every day and set my bird free? And I would just come back in the afternoon and track it down with telemetry and call it. And usually after a couple days, the bird knew right where I was going to pick it up and would be waiting there for me. And the bird got to fly, got to learn to dodge. And I don't know if by weight, I don't know if it ever caught anything. I weighed it when it came home every day, and by weight, I don't think she ever caught anything, but I assume she chased things. And she learned to dodge tree branches and fly around. She built her muscle strength, and she got rid of that vocalization. Now, again, that's a risk, especially now we have GPS transmitters, but radio transmitters, it takes some work. You gotta, might have to track your bird down. But it worked great for her, and it got rid of that vocalization problem. It got her very fit, and she ended up becoming a fantastic hunter. The last example is I had a captive bred peregrine that I flew for years, a little male. I named him Tiger, and he was a great bird. Him and his sister, I flew both of them, but he just loved to fly. He just loved to, he'd always hunt for me, but I had a situation where I could fly him 2 or 3 times a day. Fly him in the morning, fly him in the afternoon on my lunch break, and fly him in the evening before sunset. And he just loved to fly, loved to just dink around and just sun himself. And it's like, I want him, where I worked in a different valley than I lived in. And so there were these big old starling flocks and these big fields and these big areas. And I thought, you know what? I read in some of the literature, some of the falconers, and some of them in Europe would do this. I remember, I think this is actually in the Western Sporting has a falconers, like a diary, like a journal, where it's got little stories intermixed within and game recipes in the back. It's a really cool publication. But then you can record your own stories throughout it. And one of the stories in there too, it had a falconer who had done basically this idea where he would just set his falcon free and let it do its thing, and then he'd, call it when he was going to go hunting. And I thought, I'm going to try this. And I did this all winter long. Every morning, that was when I was down to hunting once a day. So on the way to work, I'd put his transmitter on, and I'd set him free over in these fields, and he'd fly and hunt and do his thing. And, when after work, I'd get off, and I'd come pick him up and just call him down to the lure, and we'd go home. And he was so fit. He was so well muscled. He did great. And again, that is technically a risk. But so is falconry, and so is life, so is any field sport. There's always risks involved, but for him, he was such a good bird, he was so loyal, and he knew the area so well, that's what I do. So during the work week, I do that every morning, and then on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I'd take him out hunting, and we'd go out, hunting pheasants or ducks. And he was so fit and so able to chase. It was great. He was the fittest falcon I ever had, and I owe that to this sort of a tame hack situation. Now, again, every bird is different. Every bird's thinking is different, and so it takes effort, time. You got to think on your feet, and you got to have a loyal bird. You got to have a bird that you've trained very well to come back, and you got to have really good radio transmitters or very good, like Marshall Radio GPS is what I use now, and it's incredible. It's got 3D GPS. You can track down exactly where your bird is. It's very helpful. There's always risks involved, but I think if your circumstances are correct, a tame hack, which is kind of a hybrid idea. And again, everybody's going to have a different definition of exactly what a tame hack is, but it's a wonderful thing, and it can get your bird in such great shape if you have circumstances and land to make it possible to do it, where it's safer to do it. It's a great way to train a bird and keep them fit and give them as close to a wild experience as possible. So it's a cool idea. Let me know if you've ever tried it. Let me know what your experience has been. If you haven't already, if you could hit subscribe and subscribe to this channel, I appreciate it. I'm trying to build it up. Let me know your comments, your questions, and your experiences down below. And as always, happy hawking.